It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome back, fellow Quillers, to this very exciting episode of Don't Quill the Messenger. And as always, thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to have you here as part of the ever-growing Quiller Nation. My special guest today is known to most of you as the celebrated screenwriter of the film Anonymous, produced in 2011 with great controversy and visceral responses from some and cerebral responses from others. Nonetheless, John Orloff took the brave and courageous plunge into writing and producing a film about the Shakespeare authorship mystery and immediately created an iconic piece of art. John, welcome to the program, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
It has been a dozen years now since Anonymous sparked such extreme reaction from filmgoers and movie critics. But before we get into where you feel the film stands today, I'd like to talk about what it was like to make the project happen.
Okay. Where do you want to start? It was a long, arduous process.
I know you wrote the film long before it was actually made. And through your connections to your wonderful wife and HBO, you were able to pitch it to Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg, and they rejected the idea. They end up hiring you for Band of Brothers.
Well, just Tom, not Steven. just to clarify, just Tom.
Well, they ended up hiring you for Band of Brothers, so they must have seen something in your talent, even though they didn't like the Shakespeare mystery topic.
Yes.
But
yes,
tell me about this sort of...
They liked the script. They just didn't want to make the movie.
Sure. But so tell me about this sort of labor of love and this, like you said, arduous journey and task of getting it to be greenlit and finally becoming the work of art that it has become.
I guess it started when I first learned about the issue in the late 80s, and then sort of held off. You know, I was a college student, maybe just out of college. And I didn't decide to write it until I met my now wife, which you mentioned earlier. And that in itself was an arduous process because it was a very hard script to write, required a ton of research, not just about the authorship issue, but Elizabethan theater and Elizabethan politics and Elizabethan life. Excuse me. And it was also kicking the can down the road of not writing, because I was only 29, 30 years old when I started writing it, and an American, obviously. So it seemed to be a rather ambitious thing to do. And it took a while. It took me about 18 months, and then I finished it and eventually got to Tom Hanks. Like you said, he didn't want to make it, and we ended up having other things together, still do. But eventually, that script was sort of my calling card. But I'll tell you a story actually a little before that even, which should have been an indication of things to come, which was when I was trying to get an agent. So after I wrote the script, I didn't have an agent. I didn't know how to sell it. I didn't know how to get it to people, much less Tom Hanks. So I was living in LA. A friend of mine was what was called a reader at an agency called CAA, Creative Artists Agency, the biggest. And he was a script reader for them. You know, that job was just reading scripts and telling people at the agency whether they were good or not. Because a film studio, an agency just gets dozens of scripts every day in the mail. And so this guy's job was to read those scripts and like do a summation of them and say whether their bosses should read it or not.
That sounds like a great gig.
Crap.
I'd like a gig like that. That sounds like a great gig.
Yeah, it was. I don't think they do it anymore. I think that's, a thing of the 80s and 90s that's disappeared in the film business. So anyway, so my friend was also an aspiring screenwriter, and he sort of broke in as a screenwriter via that. He got an agent at CAA. And so when I finished my script, I gave it to him, my friend, and he gave it to some people at CAA to maybe for me to get an agent. And his agent didn't want to do it, said no. And then I got a phone call from another agent out of the blue. And this is the story. He calls me, a person I've never met, never even heard of. And he says, "Hi, my name is blah, blah, blah. I'm an agent at CAA, and I just read your script. And I want to tell you I was incredibly offended by it. How dare you write something like this?"
Why has that not shocked me?
Well, yeah, here's a powerful LA agent who doesn't know me from Adam, who doesn't have to respond at all, has taken time out of his busy day to reprimand me on the script. It was, that's not how it normally works.
No, that had to be a little unsettling.
As a sign.
I mean, you're a brand new screenwriter. You've got this, your Venus and Adonis.
I was a wannabe screenwriter.
Yeah, right. And you have this, first heir of your invention, as it were, this Venus and Adonis of your life's work type of thing. And he takes his time on purpose, like out of his day, out of his life, to just call you, not to say, "Hey, here's a job," or "Hey, I like your writing," or but to tell you how horrible you are for even having thought about writing such a script.
Correct. Yeah. I was I was stunned, and luckily somebody else at the agency also read it and really liked it, and is still one of my agents to this day. But anyway, so that script became my calling card. It's how I ended up meeting Tom Hanks in 98 or 99. I think, and eventually got Band of Brothers. It's also how I would meet other people in the film business, right? Like now that I had an agent at CAA, he would send that script out as a writing sample, basically, because nobody was going to make it in 98 or 99 because I had the misfortune of having Shakespeare in Love just come out in like 96 or 97, I think. So it was not, and one of my ideas was, one of what I thought was an interesting idea was to have Shakespeare as a young romantic movie star type, which when I started writing the script seemed like a very novel idea, but then obviously Shakespeare in Love was very much about that. Anyway, so nobody really wanted to make it at that time period, but it got me a lot of meetings. And then Band of Brothers comes out and I do other work and I go on another meeting, and then, oh gosh, I can't remember what year. I want to say somewhere around 04, 05. I get a phone call from my agent saying, Roland Emmerich wants to meet you. He has a movie he's interested in you maybe writing. I was like, okay, that's weird. I was familiar with Roland's work, Independence Day, Stargate, Godzilla. He'd also made The Patriot, which is a historical drama.
Yes.
So anyway, I go to Roland's office, and he starts telling me about this movie he wants a writer for. And it's the movie that will become The Day After Tomorrow. And he's sort of telling me all about it in his thick German accent. He's saying, yeah, so we have this scene where, the Queen Mary goes down the Fifth Avenue in New York because it's all frozen and it's going down the road. He's just telling me about this thing. And I'm listening going, why is he talking to me about this? And when he finishes it, telling me what the movie is, I go, wow, that's really cool. But that's really just, I don't know how to write something like that. And he seemed a little surprised, not people don't normally say that to Roland. And he then said, well, yeah, okay, well, what else have you written? Because he only knew about Band of Brothers. And so I sort of thought in the back of my brain, well, I got nothing to lose. And I pitched him the script that was then called Soul of the Age, which is it is a different script than the one we made. And anyway, so I pitched him Soul of the Age, and he said,
like that title better.
I'd like to read this
I have to say, I really do like that title better.
It's not my favorite title either. It's not my title. It's Roland's.
I know that there are reasons why these decisions get made.
Listen, what happened? I mean, we'll get into the making of the film, but the next step might answer your question, because the next step was Roland read my script. He loved it, and he bought it himself. He just bought it from me.
Wow.
And yeah.
You were like, ding, ding. Okay, this is what I've been waiting for.
He would tell you, he didn't know anything about the authorship issue, and, but he read it, and I think he really identified with some of the characters and some of the themes, and particularly Soul of the Age, even more so, because the biggest difference between Soul of the Age and Anonymous is, so after Roland, sorry, I'm kind of going haphazard, but after Roland bought it, he reads all the books, and now Roland has ideas, right?
Sure.
And so that meant the script was going to change, because Roland owns it. It's now his script. And I, am writing it and rewriting it for Roland to write the movie that Roland wants to make, right? That's how it works. He's now my boss. And so, he did all this research, and he got really into the Prince Tudor theory. And, I don't really hold much faith in it from a historical perspective. And I was a little resistant when Roland first started to bring it up. But at the same time, from a dramatic standpoint, I could see the benefits of integrating the politics way more than Soul of the Age had. Soul of the Age had, God, I don't even think it had the Essex Rebellion. I don't think it had a tiny bit of politics. I mean, Elizabeth was definitely a character, and she and De Vere were former lovers, but there were no flashbacks to them being lovers, because that wasn't relevant, because we weren't doing the Prince Tudor theory in my original script. So none of those, that doesn't happen in the original script. And there's a lot more about Shakespeare and Marlowe, and I haven't read that version in so long. But so one of the things as we were working on it, we kept calling it Soul of the Age for a long time. I don't remember when Roland decided we should call it Anonymous, and I disagreed with him. But again, ultimately, it's his decisions. But what then happened? So after writing it for Roland, as I said, sort of making the big changes I just said, really bringing in the Prince Tudor theory, making the Essex Rebellion much more important. We then tried to get it made, and that was a hard process. And we came close to getting it made, I think in '05. And then the studio decided not to make it if we wouldn't make it with like Brad Pitt. You know, it was literally kind of that ridiculous.
Well,
if we couldn't
that would have
make
been
it
ridiculous.
with,
that would have been terrible. I'm glad you
no,
held
it was
out.
really ridiculous, and we just all decided to just sort of hold off at the moment. Roland ended up making another movie. Might have been the day after them. I can't remember what it was. And then it sort of disappeared, and I went off and did other things, and Roland went off and did other things, but it obviously sort of, I couldn't do anything with it anymore because it's now Roland's property. And so, a few years go by, and after Roland had made 2012, which was a huge hit for Sony. I mean, gigantic hit. And they said to him, "What do you want made? What do you want to make next?" And he said, "Soul of the Age." And by that point, Soul of the Age was kind of a well-known script in Hollywood, because a lot of kind of VIPs had read it over the years, and it had been on the Blacklist, which is this, screenplay sort of in Hollywood hot list of scripts. So, finally Sony said yes, I guess in 2010, I think, that we could make it. And that started a whole host of rewrites, and that's sort of how we got it going.
You were given executive producer credit on the film. How, for my listeners, explain what that exactly means and how involved that makes you or doesn't make you. I mean, you've talked about it being Roland's property and him sort of becoming the boss. What does that exactly mean? Are you involved in the talent acquisition at all? Were you engaged in any of the difficult process of acquiring the talent for the film or making those kinds of decisions?
Yes, the short answer is yes to all of that. The term executive producer means different things on different projects, and television and executive producer is very different than executive producer in movies. In television, that's like the most senior thing. In films, it's not. It's sort of the next level down. Just producer is the big thing. So, it can be sort of a vanity title. Like often it is a vanity title. It's just given to somebody as a bonus to say, "Hey, you did a little extra work, and this is a way for us to give back to you without giving you money." In this case, Roland was really, really he's a lovely man. A wonderful collaborator, even though we didn't always disagree. Obviously, who does, especially on something so emotional and important to both of us, because it became his mission as much as mine. And he was very inviting to me in the whole process. So yes, I was part of the casting, although, I mean, again, it was Roland's movie, literally. So, I could just say, yeah, I really like that guy, or what about that guy? Or when we got down to a few people for each role. And then I was on the shoot for the whole shoot, pre-production and shooting, doing rewrites, helping with whatever I could help with. I mean, because, I know a lot about the world, so I could help all the teams, the costumes, the art direction, the set design. So, yeah, I was kind of instrumental, and I was there pretty much for every frame that was shot.
Well, and it's such a beautiful film. I mean, it broke the Greg Tolan mold with the new camera technology that it was using. Rivaled Wells.
It was the first film shot on a digital Aeroflex camera.
Yeah, I mean, it totally broke the mold.
Very early in
filmmaking.
the digital.
Yeah, and he does magnificent. And the cinematographer, I can't remember her name right now, but she was, it's a brilliant movie, and
Anna
it's a beautiful movie.
Anna. Yeah,
a lot of people
She's super
aren't aware
talented.
that the sets for that film are incredible. And from my research, there were at least 70 different hand-built sets that were made for that film, sets that theater artists would have salivated over to have on any stage. And I think that lends that beauty, that stagecraft to the film.
I'll send you some pictures after this.
That'd be great.
You can post to go with this.
I will, yeah, absolutely.
Because the sets were phenomenal. They were built in Babelsberg, which is the old UFA studios outside of Berlin. UFA was the silent German film studio that made all those Fritz Lang movies, and then Goebbels actually took it over during the war. And then it's still used as a film studio now. So that's where we shot. And our crew was all German. Obviously, our actors were almost all English. But all the heads of the departments were German. And they were just super dedicated to getting it as right as they could. And we built, the biggest set was the street and the theater, which the theater played as both the Rose and the Globe, just redressed. And it wasn't full scale. It was about I can't remember whether it was 2/3 or 1/3 scale. But we could get a lot of people in there. And we had 3 floors, and it was great fun. It was great fun to be in it. And then opposite the stage of the proscenium was a giant door, which was like the main entrance to the theater. And beyond the double doors entering the theater was a street that went down, I don't know how long, at least a block. It felt like more. And it was muddy, and it was all Tudor and signs and chickens and goats. And you would sit in this theater, or I would sit in this theater, and have moments to myself of just sitting there in this theater, looking down this road, and you can't tell what year it is. And it was amazing.
It must have been transportive. I mean, it truly must have been transportive. The film is transportive, and I can't imagine actually having been there on the set and feeling like you were living in another world, in another place and time.
Very much so. It was really quite impressive. The rest of the sets tended to be on a sound stage, smaller. It was a low budget movie, so we learned the trick really quickly that you could photo print large tapestries on canvas. So find an old Renaissance tapestry, high resolution, photograph it, then reproduce it on a canvas, and throw that over some plywood, and you don't have to build a wall. Right?
Sure.
That's a wall now.
Sure.
So there's a lot of that, a lot of plywood painted as, real wood. But yeah, they did an amazing job. And then what another thing that Roland could bring to the film that a lot of directors could not is a real understanding of special effects and how you integrate special effects and how you film footage to be placed in special effects. That is not something that just because you're a director, you know how to do. So he really knows how to use effects to great purpose.
Well, he obviously is also, yes, he has made a lot of big blockbuster special effects laden films, but he's obviously an actor's director. there are so many fine performances in the film, and I always feel that a good director is a big part of great performances. From a director and actor standpoint, I think that collaboration is essential to getting the best performance you can get. And I think that every Oxfordian in the world, when they see the Earl of Oxford in their head, they see Rhys Ifans in their head. I know I do. I see Redgrave as Elizabeth in my head, and David Thewlis is the only William Cecil that I can picture, even though I've seen countless photos of paintings of him.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Edward Hogg as Robert Cecil is like just
isn't he fantastic?
Indelibly like connected to my brain. Just last year, I happened to be in England, and I went to Robert Cecil's gravesite, his tomb there in the church in Hatfield, and all I could see was Edward Hogg laying there in the effigy for some reason. Like I just couldn't get him out of my head. He's just so magnificent in the film.
He was intense. He was close to pardon me, close to a method actor in staying in character for the shoot. Super intense. Didn't want to talk to anybody outside of the shoot. Like on the weekends, he was lovely, just charming, smart guy. But during the shoot, he was really intense. But to pull back and to answer your question, one of the other things that was really nice about Roland that most directors, I would say pretty much any director I've ever worked with besides Roland, doesn't want a writer anywhere near their set.
I totally understand that. I totally understand that. I've produced plays, original works, where the last thing I want is the playwright in the theater while I'm rehearsing. Right. Like that's absolutely no, go away.
Yeah.
This is our work now. We'll take it from here.
So Roland isn't that way. And that probably stems from the fact that his early work was with a producing writing partner, Independence Day and Stargate. He co-wrote, and then they co-produced and did not officially co-direct. Roland has the directing credit on those movies. But this guy, Dean Devlin, was on the set the whole time. So Roland was really used to having another brain who knew as much about the film as he did next to him. And he had the confidence to not feel threatened by that fact. And so he let me talk to the actors as well, which is a very rare thing to happen on a set. And in fact, sometimes he wanted me to talk to the actors over his own part in it. For example, the first time Vanessa arrived, she wanted to talk about the script with Roland. And Roland was like, no, you go. I was like, well, do you want to come? No, don't want to come. And so, I spent 2 hours with Vanessa talking about Elizabeth and the role and every line of her dialogue. And then on sets, I was talking to the actors constantly. As was Roland.
That leads me to my next question for you was there any pushback at all from any of the actors with regards to the script, with regards to any particular scenes or the inclusion?
Not at all.
None.
No,
Zero.
They were all
Wow.
fascinated by the subject and open-minded to it. And if they felt differently, I think maybe Ed Hogg might have been very Stratfordian, but I could be wrong, actually, so don't quote me on that. But I'm sure not David. I'm not even sure David Thewlis. I don't know, but I do know that Vanessa was open-minded about it. Rhys was open-minded about it, and the script really spoke to actors because it's about creativity. It's about the creative process. That's ultimately what it's about. And I would argue it's a pretty good execution of that. And it speaks to other artists in theater, I think. And so it was actually not hard at all to get these people interested. And then Vanessa had always wanted to play Elizabeth. As you might remember, she's played Mary before in the 60s.
Yes.
But she wanted to play Elizabeth, the redhead. And she never got the chance. And so she was just thrilled to finally be able to play Elizabeth, a thing she had always wanted to do. And then having her daughter, Jolie, play the younger version of Elizabeth was just sort of adding another sort of lovely Redgrave layer to it all.
Absolutely. It was extra icing on the cake. And of course, they're both brilliant in the film. And one of the things that I believe...
Yeah, I agree. They both, everybody just really worked their tail off.
Would have loved to have talked to Vanessa Redgrave about the fact that, yes, she finally gets to play Elizabeth, and in such a unique and different way than any other actress who has played the role before. And some of the specific scenes that are included in the film, including that Essex confrontation scene, which is just so impactful. And she's so brilliant in it as well. In that moment, it's so raw and real. And so many of us who know the history know that moment. And I don't know that it's ever been depicted that way before ever. And I love that moment in the film. And I think I would wonder how she felt about having that opportunity to play, the Virgin Queen so raw and exposed the way that she did. And
that was what she wanted to do. I mean, I think one of the things that really attracted her to the script was how we show Elizabeth so vulnerable in so many different ways, but at the same time, so incredibly strong and a survivor. At the same time, I think really excited Vanessa. And, she is not just one of the most brilliant actors alive. She's such a brilliant human being. And, she challenged every, why is this here? Why is she saying it this way? And, occasionally we'd make some changes because she was right. Because she knew as much about Elizabeth as anybody on set, because she'd been reading biographies of Elizabeth her whole life. And she's been obsessed with Elizabeth, her whole life. So it was a great, great collaboration with her in particular. Paulus was just a delight as a human being, the consummate professional, says yes to anything, a complete delight, requires no direction at all. A genius, just a genius. And I would say the same with Reese. Every once in a while, Reese would need a little nudge or, a little less of this, a little more of that. But that's because it was a very complicated role, with so many different layers of realities internally going on in the character. I mean, we got so lucky with Reese.
He claims the part, and it's incredible because when you look at his other work, and a lot of his other work is very comical stuff and very character-driven stuff. And this was at that time in his career so different from so many things he had done before. And he just claims it and just pops right out of the box in such a way that it was shocking. When you see him in other films, it's hard to recognize him in other work because of the brilliance that he brings to the emotional complexity of the Earl of Oxford in the film.
I completely agree. He exceeded all expectations. I can't remember the first time his name came up, but I'm pretty sure that I was not expecting to like him in whatever performance video I was about to see. Just because I was familiar with a little bit of his work, comedic stuff in Notting Hill, and but he was just amazing and equally on the shoot, just an incredible amount of dedicated people. It was really wonderful. They really cared about the Earl, and this story, and getting it as right as they could.
You mentioned earlier that you'd received this phone call from this agent out of the blue who, reprimanded you for even having the audacity to write such a script. How prepared were you? And obviously there were the challenges of finally getting the film made, but how prepared were you for the reactions to the film that occurred when it was announced and the previews were coming, and then after it hit and it was out there? How prepared were you for what happened next?
I was not naive. I had been part. I mean, I'm not a part of literally, but constantly keeping track of the authorship issue in the public sphere. So I very much had an inkling that it was controversial. I had no idea what was going to happen and how intense, how severe it was. It was a complete shock. The moment I knew we were in trouble was, twofold, because they happened around the same time. Sony, the studio who paid for it and released it, also set up like the publicity tour for it. And they thought, oh, why don't we screen the film at these elite colleges and then have a interesting dialogue after the film with their English professors and
an interesting dialogue. Oh yeah, I'll bet there was some interesting dialogue.
Well, Harvard and Yale refused to have us on campus. A lot of schools refused to even have our film on campus.
Wow.
Berkeley was the only sort of, there are a couple fancy schools, but Berkeley was the most intellectual, quote unquote. So we go to Berkeley, film plays, film ends, we go out, and this young woman raises her hand and asks a question. And she preambles her question by saying something along the lines of, "You're trying to take my life away from me." And she elaborates by saying, I'm going to, if Shakespeare can be a nobody and become the most famous writer in the world, I can be a nobody and become the most famous whatever I want to be in the world. And you're telling me I can't. And I thought, whoa, well, I sort of am. That is kind of the argument. And B, I was realizing, wow, the degrees to which people, any people, not just Englishmen, take Shakespeare personally in their lives is really intense.
It is, and isn't it? It's insanity sometimes.
It is absolutely insanity. I mean, and that was just the start of it. Robert Shapiro. Whew,
that guy. We don't like to talk about him on this show. He's a piece of work.
Because he's such a dishonest broker.
Yes.
Above anything else. I mean, like whatever else you want to say, he's just an asshole.
Indeed.
I mean, he's just an asshole. And he was really wouldn't be on stage with me, so I couldn't come to things that he would denounce our film at. He published, I think, 2 articles about the movie, maybe 3. It was just endless. Yeah. And I can't remember if it was him or Ron Rosenbaum who compared me to a Holocaust denier. Which I'm sure other Shakespeare people have heard in their own lives,
yes,
but it's still true. Like, what?
Well, I think Shapiro, of all people, is the absolute most threatened by any discussion
Yeah,
of
no,
the
he's like I
authorship
said, he's not a nice guy.
Well, and
as a human being.
Look at how he has made his living. I mean, look at how much you want to talk about how personally he takes it. It's not only personal to his ego and his identity as a person in the world, but it's personal to his finances because he's made his living off of this myth. And God forbid anyone challenge that, because that's his money. That's his bottom line. So he holds on to it as tightly as Shylock holds on to his purse strings. You know what I mean? It's that visceral.
Yeah. And there's no question. I mean, that's certainly part of the whole larger issue is the whole Shakespeare industry. But even so, he's a really, it goes beyond just his living. He is really just a jerk.
You're not the first guest on this program to mention him and to describe him thus. But one of the things, so all these beautiful aspects of the film and this wonderful experience you have with this collaborative group of artists to create this beautiful piece of work. And then many of those aspects tend to get mostly ignored due to the establishment attacks on the subject matter without actually making any reference to the artistry of the film. And that was the thing that disturbed me the most when it was happening and since it's happened. I mean, Rex Reed, Roger Ebert, they had some kind words to say about the film, but there's this irony of those who condemned the film did so because of what they called historical inaccuracies, as if Hollywood never fictionalizes history for the sake of a good film ever. Which of course they learned by the way. Or as
if Shakespeare never did.
I was going to say, which they learned from P.S. the works of Shakespeare, because he is the pure historical fiction writer of all time, from Julius Caesar to Henry V, for instance. I mean, so they went so far.
I know. I certainly would bring that up in some of the conversations I would have at the time when the film came out. I would make those very points. But it wasn't relevant, people got exceedingly emotional, which was weird because when people actually would watch the movie, they tended to really like it. People tended to think it was a little over confusing, which I don't disagree. The flashbacks, flash forwards was a Roland thing, and it works, but I think it works even better on the second or third time you watch the movie when you can track it all better. The movie's really good. I think just as a movie, it's I don't describe it any longer. Once we made it into anonymous and it was no longer Soul of the Age, and I distinguish the difference. Anonymous is Soul of the Age with the Prince Tudor theory threaded throughout and changing the focus a little less on art and a little bit more on the relationship between art and politics, which is another thing I really love. Don't get me wrong. When it became, I've totally lost my track of thought. What were we talking about?
Well, I was just going to add to the thought that I think that the succession issue is the issue if you're dealing with the Shakespeare authorship mystery. I think those two issues are connected, and I think that that link is unbreakable. And so, yes, the film can get
I think
a little
the succession
convoluted.
issue is definitely in there. I just am not sure that I think that Southampton is the son of Elizabeth and De Vere.
For a lot of people,
that's where I'm
that
not
became,
sure I go there.
I think for a lot of people that became their biggest issue with the film, and I think even more so the secondary level, the issue, the idea that there was this incestuous relationship, that De Vere was also a son of Elizabeth. I think when you take it to I think they call that Prince Tudor 2.
Right.
I always get confused between Prince Tudor 1 and Prince Tudor 2. But
I kind of use them, interchangeably.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, the Southampton one is more believable. I guess my point is though that once we did that, I sort of just think of the film more, and I would refer to it as an Elizabethan melodrama. In a Shakespearean sense, because all those changes are incredibly dramatic and incredibly Shakespearean, and Greek, the incest and the power grabbing. I mean, all of that, whether I think it's true or not, or what the chances of it being true or not, are almost irrelevant if you look at the film not as a documentary trying to convince you of something, but as a drama, as a piece of dramatic fiction. And it may or may not be true. If you look at it in that context, I do like the incest and the baby tutor and prince tutor. Isn't that it? I can't remember.
We just call it the succession theory now. It makes it easier that the bottom line is that there was this major issue.
I haven't really delved much into this stuff in the last 12 years because, it was hard. It really hurt. It was personal, the attacks, and it was personal in such a mocking way, and equating the film or questioning the authorship as just, everybody knows, they've heard it, such crazy people thinking that I'm so crazy, right? It was very painful, and as you said, very few people saw the movie.
I don't recall that happening to any other fictional history piece.
No, it never happens. It was specifically Shakespeare.
Popular pieces today, such as Downton Abbey, Bridgerton, Outlander. These are the popular pieces of fictional.
Well, those aren't
history.
Trying to be. Those are real fiction, though. I would compare this more to Shakespeare in Love. Shakespeare in Love. Certainly, none of that happened.
And no one spent any time attacking that film for stretching history or for its historical inaccuracies.
Nobody attacked it for that.
No, not at all.
Delight.
So I don't understand why. Well, I do understand, but I do think it's important to point out that this film was unique in that way, and the critics came after it with a vengeance in a way that they've never come after any other piece of filmmaking or cinematography and art this way.
It was really intense. I got to tell you, it was. Very disappointing and, super intense, but what are you going to do? People love the film. That's all I know,
Did you have concerns about this interfering with your career after this?
Not really. It didn't help. Hollywood is a success based business, and having a movie, not garner awards or box office is never a good thing. But it didn't, I had relationships and people and, I haven't been not working because of it. So it didn't hurt me. Literally, it would have hurt me probably more if I lived in England, but not here.
They might have tarred and feathered you.
English, yeah. Well, Stratford upon Avon practically. Remember they covered the statue of Shakespeare up in shame because he was so ashamed of the movie for a while. It was just ridiculous.
You want to talk about melodrama?
Then Prince Charles spoke out against it. Judi Dench spoke out. All these people just went out of their way. It was very strange.
Okay, but Charles'
people
father
have a very personal relationship with Shakespeare.
Charles' father was an outspoken doubter of the Shakespeare myth of Stratford. So somebody
was
should
he
throw,
the
yes,
Prince of Edinburgh?
Yes, he was. He absolutely was. He was public about it and said, "No, I don't believe it." So
That's
somebody
probably
should
why
have
his
thrown
son
that back
isn't.
at Charles.
Yeah,
And of
yeah.
course, you did have. I mean, this isn't your only claim to fame. Obviously, many people are so familiar with Band of Brothers. It was such a huge success. Ironic that they end up choosing you for. They didn't want to make this film, but they chose you for a project that uses a Shakespeare quote as its title. I always found that ironic with Band of Brothers. But you also 4 years previous, you made a Mighty Heart with Angelina Jolie.
Just to interrupt. Wait, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure, of course.
The Band of Brothers is why the Henry V Band of Brothers scene is in Anonymous.
Oh, so it's sort of like a little Easter egg.
Yeah.
Love it. That's fabulous.
Yeah.
Of course. Well, that makes so much sense. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then I was going to mention some of your
It's
other
also
work.
a very relatable piece of Shakespeare for people to really understand. You know, we were always very conscious of Shakespeare, actual Shakespeare in the movie, be really concrete, easy to understand Shakespeare.
The performance sequences.
Anyway, go on. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Well, now that we're talking about that, I want to touch on that too. Like the performance sequences in the film, from my perspective as a theater artist, are the most beautiful moments in the film because of the way it speaks to me as an artist. And I believe they are the best depictions I have ever seen of what court performances and then later on public performances would have looked like in that time in the Elizabethan era.
Well, thank you very much. I can tell you why. We were really, really lucky that we hired a not student mentee of Mark Rylance. This woman Tamara, oh God, her last name is escaping me right now. Tamara is a theater director, worked with Mark Rylance. He suggested her for the job of directing our stage productions. And she then hired a dedicated troupe of, we called them the players, of the players for the Globe and the Rose. And all of the plays within a plays are directed by Tamara, staged by Tamara, and then acted by this group of actors who I think some had been at the Globe. I mean, they were very good Shakespearean actors. And then, of course, Mark, he was doing Jerusalem at the time, so he was very, very busy. But he managed to squeeze a weekend in to do that the opening of Henry V as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, thank you. I'm really glad you noticed it because there was a lot of work and effort went into those productions within a production.
Well, not only did I notice it, but I've been somebody who for the last decade has said that one of the biggest issues I have with the film is that it's only 2+ hours long. I feel like the mark was missed. It should have been a miniseries. It should have been an HBO series, a Showtime series, and each episode should have involved the production of one of the plays and then told the reasons why Edward de Vere is connected to that play autobiographically. I mean, why isn't there, why isn't he, it's important to note, I think, in history that he's the least covered, least mentioned of the most important figures in Elizabethan history. If earls are important, then the oldest earldom is important. If William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, is important, then his daughter and son-in-law are important. If jousting was important, then the Queen's champion jouster is important. But this guy has been basically erased from history for a reason. And I feel like what is missing is somebody to do a biographical series just based on his life, even if you just forget the Shakespeare aspect of it. You know what I mean?
I think you're right. I think the chances of that happening are very small. It's just, it was so hard getting this made. And because it wasn't a success, Hollywood runs on success. It runs on money. It would be very difficult I think it's a great idea. His life is so interesting. But I just don't see anybody making it at this point. It's hard to get anything made.
Well, if only you knew a guy who knew a guy, that might, actually work out.
Trust me, doesn't matter. I've been working on and eventually making another World War II miniseries with Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg. And just because you have Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg wanting to make a World War II miniseries doesn't mean it happened.
Sure.
It took 10 years to get this other thing made.
And we're starting to see the previews for that. Masters of the Air, I believe it's called.
We're
starting to see previews for that and advertisements for that. It's going to be coming to screens near us very soon. I think through Apple Plus, I believe, is where it's being released. If I recall.
Yeah, Apple Plus, January 26th.
Yeah,
the trailer has not dropped, just pictures. But it's quite a project. Very, very big. Makes Band of Brothers look like a little pastime affair. Very, very big, which is why it took 10 years to get made.
And
my point being, it's hard to get stuff made.
Well, and that was one of my questions, and that's why I asked you about, did you ever feel like this interfered with your career? And when we look at your career, and what I was going to talk about a moment ago was, 4 years previous to this film you wrote, and the film was made, A Mighty Heart, with Angelina Jolie, who still to this day says it's her favorite film she's ever been in. And many listeners will know your work from The Legend of the Guardians, especially those who have tween children or preteen children. But your latest film, ironically, I found this interesting, you wrote under a pseudonym. Why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a film called The Last Vermeer. I think that's what they ended up calling it.
Yes, that's
again, I didn't call it that. I had a much better title. I took my name off of it because it wasn't that it wasn't a very good movie. That happens in life. It was more that I had some real disagreements about how a Nazi collaborator was presented in the film. I take my Nazi collaboration very seriously.
That is very
understandable.
understandable.
I chose to withdraw my name.
That is absolutely understandable. And I wondered what that was about. And I appreciate your candid honesty there in describing that and letting us know that. But that is highly understandable. And I can't argue with that in any way.
As much as Soul of the Age / Anonymous was a big part of my life, basically from 1988 or 89, till the movie was made. So almost 20 years, but equally the Second World War has been a big part of my life, and particularly Masters of the Air, which is this new show that's going to come out in January. That's my baby, as opposed to Band or The Pacific, which had a lot of writers, and I wasn't a producer on those. And so this one has kind of been my decade. And, when you write about real guys getting killed to defeat fascism, every day you're writing that. And then somebody makes a movie and sort of diminishes fascism. Yeah, I was not so hip to it.
Well, that's very consistent with you and what people can learn about you if they do their research. And one of the things that I also think is very interesting about you, and you'll probably be very humble about this, but you have been a champion for solid leadership for the Writers Guild for many years prior to this latest battle that just occurred. In fact, you've been somewhat of a visionary who predicted that some of these battles would happen that we've just seen happen. And so, I applaud you.
Well, you did some research.
it's my job, but I applaud you for that. And you've been very consistent about the statements that you've made and the positions that you've held. And sometimes they probably weren't very popular with your peers. But you hold your ground.
No, I'm not popular in the Writers Guild.
Well, but you know what? I don't think that Edward de Vere was popular among his fellow earls either. So, we're all kindred spirits to some degree.
Right.
And I still say perhaps Anonymous might have been just a little too early, because this topic is gaining new ground with a new audience and a younger audience that is starting to challenge the establishment and really question what these stuffy white-haired professors have been pushing down their throats for so long. And as you well know, you make a living off of historical fiction. Historical fiction crushes the market and continues to crush the market. So maybe in your future there is an Edward de Vere miniseries after Masters of the Air.
Well, I think it's probably because the younger generation, it's so much less a top-down society in terms of how you learn things. The great oracle who teaches you what's left and what's right and what's 2 + 2, that oracle is now sort of bifurcated and trifurcated and turned into a million different sources. And the way that the younger generation gets their information is so radically different than when we did. So hopefully you're right.
Well, and I am a big proponent that one of the things that's beautiful about Anonymous is it's a period piece, but it stands the test of time. And it's a film that is worthy of seeing again, as you mentioned. Sometimes you want to see it like the third time through before you actually really get all the nuances that are there. That's why I own a copy, because I've watched it multiple times. In fact, my wife and I did a watch along.
Well, there it
for
is.
Our listeners.
It's intentional, all that stuff,
Yeah, it's fabulous. And now when I watch it the next time, I will specifically pay more attention to the Henry V moment and get a little chuckle now that I know that was done for a reason. Maybe we could figure out a way to get Ed Hogg to reprise his role as Robert Cecil and do a film just about the life of Robert Cecil called The Imp.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one too.
Demonstrate how he destroyed
it would be very similar to. Say again. Sorry, we were talking over
That's okay.
time.
I was going to say, he destroyed, that man, Robert Cecil, destroyed so many of the courtiers of the time in order to advance James to the throne of England. And what a fascinating life he had. This, little hunchback that the Queen referred to as her little imp, which is where I think the title should be and where it comes from. But I think that would be an awesome film as well.
Yeah. He is an amazing character.
What's next for you, John, after Masters of the Air? Can you share with us some little bits of notes or sketches or drafts you're working on?
I am working on a couple of things that I can't quite talk about. They haven't come to full fruition. Masters of the Air has really consumed all of my time. I mean, we've been in post-production for 2 full years, and we're still not quite done with it. We're almost done, but not quite. So, I've been working on other stuff, but not dedicated until really now. So I'm just getting my sea legs back and working on this little thing and that little thing and figuring out what's going to be the next big thing. It's hard coming out of these projects. It was the same with Anonymous. Anonymous was a very emotional, complicated process. The film itself, just making it, was a really all-consuming process, as is Masters of the Air. And so I'm just kind of taking a breath. And we just got through the writer's strike, which helped me take a breath. And so I'm just gliding back into it.
Do you have any old scripts laying around? I mean, you wrote Soul of the Age so many years ago, and it sat around. I mean, it got passed around and then sat around and then finally got made. Do you have any other completed scripts that you've been sitting on that you hope someday will make it to fruition, or are you just working on new things?
The problem with this, I tended to not write specs in my career. Soul of the Age was the only spec I've ever written. All my other scripts, whether they got made or not, were written under contract for somebody. And in that case, I don't own the scripts. So that said, my two favorite unproduced scripts of mine, which you never know, was the first script I wrote after Band of Brothers was for Tom Hanks and Michael Mann. And it was about the rise of power of Julius Caesar and the civil war between him and Pompey. And then another script I wrote based on the Ray Bradbury book, The Martian Chronicles. Those are my two favorite scripts that I've written that haven't gotten made.
Those are both great. We haven't had a good, sword and sandals film in a while. I don't know if it was a film or a series you're talking about with regards to Caesar and Pompey. I feel like that.
Well, we're about to have one. Gladiator 2 is about to go into production.
Oh, that's right.
Ridley Scott.
You had to remind me of that. But Russell Crowe is not involved, I understand.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. But then the Martian Chronicles, we all can remember, I want to say it was like the late 60s, early 70s.
No, it was
film
the 80s.
Version,
television.
Hudson. Yeah, Rock Hudson. That was horrible. That was terrible.
It was television, Rock Hudson in the 80s.
Yeah, it was no good.
Terrible.
Yeah, so we need that. That needs to be done.
Yeah.
I think Ray Bradbury's probably still spinning in his grave.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
I know. It's just one of those things that, the movie business.
There's that film version of Fahrenheit 451 that's really horrible too. Maybe that one's from the late 60s.
Directed by Francois Truffaut.
Yeah, that
one, the 60s one.
Yeah, that thing is horrible too.
It was remade. That was remade.
Was it?
A couple of times.
Oh, poor Bradbury. People don't do well with his work. So hopefully you did something better, and it's out there.
It's very hard. He's hard to adapt. He was alive when I was hired to write it, and so I met with him a few times, and he's very hard to adapt. I thought I licked it. I was really, really happy with what I wrote. I don't think he ever read it. He was a character, man. Wow.
I did meet him once, and you want.
That's the great thing about screenwriting. You get to meet so many interesting people.
Yeah, he was a very salty guy. I met him at a reading.
Yeah,
once.
He was a salty guy.
Yeah, that's the way I would describe him.
Yeah.
He didn't give a shit.
That's a good way. Yeah, cranky. Salty.
Yeah, and he didn't give two shits about anything either. Like he was, this is who I am. Deal with it. Yeah, yeah. But you gotta.
The best story I have with him is after we had lunch this one day, and he invited me to one of his plays being performed in West Hollywood, and so I take my wife and we go. It's just the two of us, and there's no tickets for me. He did not reserve tickets for me. So buy my tickets, sit in the back of the seat. He comes out before it's a 1-act or 2 1-acts, I can't remember. And he comes out and his entire presentation is about how horrible Hollywood is at adapting his work and how awful screenwriters are. Knowing that I'm sitting there. Oh, I was like, wow, okay. Message received.
And I bet you were like, oh, this kind of reminds me of the time that agent called me out of the blue to tell me what a terrible piece of work I written.
Yeah, exactly. You don't like Shakespeare either?
You're just taking it from both sides, weren't you?
But he had a legitimate beef. He was right. Hollywood had screwed up everything they've ever tried to do with him. I think he was really just trying to warn me, like, yeah, you think you know what you're doing, boy. You don't. And he was right. The film never got made.
Well, that's a great story. Well, that's unfortunate,
yeah,
especially if you were really proud of the work.
That is don't give a fuck. That is don't give a fuck, attitude.
Yeah. Well, that's incredible. John, I can't tell you what a pleasure it has been to discuss with you these topics, and especially your film, which so many of my listeners know so well and love so much. This has been an exciting episode for us to record. I appreciate you giving your time today for the Quiller Nation. And what an incredible discussion and so many wonderful, insightful stories. And I appreciate you, sir.
Very, very good. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Just a little Quiller business to share before we conclude this episode. We have posted some new details to a new page of the website for our Quiller event coming this April. Go check that out at monumentalshakespeare.com. monumentalshakespeare.com. That's where you can find all of the details on how to register for each segment of the weekend of events and the special hotel discount link. I do want to remind you that the hotel discount link and the special group rate tickets for the Shakespeare's Brittle Glory Marathon Day of Theater at the Guthrie are both limited. And once they sell out, you'll be stuck paying full rates for either of those options. So I encourage you to jump on that today. A couple of Quillers have contacted me directly about their registration, and they report that airline tickets to Minneapolis at that time of the year are really cheap right now this far in advance. So you may want to make sure you are looking into flights as early as possible. I'm finding flights right now from either coast to Minneapolis for less than $250 round trip. So, and that includes coming from major cities such as LA, San Francisco, Boston, New York, and Washington, D.C. So you want to look into those flights now before the airlines start raising rates. That means that the entire package, the hotel stay, the opening cocktail reception, the full day Shakespeare Esquire Symposium, the Brittle Glory production marathon at the Guthrie, and the round trip airfare combined comes to less than $1,000 per person, and even less if you're sharing a room. It's the best deal on any authorship event ever, and the best authorship event schedule you could ever hope for in honor of Edward de Vere's official 473rd birthday. Make plans now, won't you, to join us and celebrate that birthday together. I want to once again thank our very special guest, John Orloff, for taking the time to share so many wonderful insights with us about the making of Anonymous. And don't forget, we have a watch-along bonus episode in our growing library of bonus features where you can watch the film along with me and my wife, Annie. Once you access the episode, it begins with giving you a specific start point to set your DVD version of the film to play. And then you can listen to our commentary about the film while you watch it in sync with us. In order to find out more about how to access the bonus library, visit our Patreon page. You can find it right from the homepage of the don'tquillthepodcast.com website. So go to don'tquillthepodcast.com, look for the red Patreon button, click on that, and it will take you right to the Patreon page where you can join our Patreon community and you can find out information about accessing bonus features. Be sure to check out this month's bonus feature as I recap our recent trip to Italy and our walk through Edward's footsteps. I think it's a very fun bonus episode and some enlightening discoveries that we made, as well as a few that already were made that directed us right to those points of history and how much we enjoyed that. So that's included in this month's special bonus feature. One last thing, last episode, I neglected to recognize this month's Quiller of the Month. For shame. So now I'll throw it over to producer Jake for a spin of the digital wheel, and we'll make sure our Quiller of the Month gets their rightful due. Take it away, Jake.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Hello, Quillers. Yes, it is I once again, the man with the plan behind all the ones and twos, producer Jake Lloyd Bacon, with the privilege of picking our October Quiller of the Month. It's our spooky season Quiller, our official spooky Quiller of the month. But before I do that, I just want to say once again how great it was to have John Orloff on the show. Stephen, that was a fantastic conversation. As a screenwriter and filmmaker myself, it was really fascinating to hear about John's journey writing the work that would inevitably become Anonymous. And it's really quite something. And I do hope that it is a subject that does get tackled at some form or another in Hollywood, whether film or television, once more. And I want to say, cannot wait for Masters of the Air. It looks like it's going to be incredible. I was a huge fan of Band of Brothers, and if you're not on that train, or on that plane, I should say, make sure you keep an eye out for Apple Plus's Masters of the Air. It's going to be fantastic. Okay, enough gushing. If you're not sure what this is, well, you got to head on over to patreon.com/don'tquillthemessenger and read all about it. Each and every month, all eligible Quillers are entered into this monthly drawing, and the winner gets some merch from the shop. By the way, we have phone cases there now for your Samsung Galaxies and your iPhones. A couple really lovely phone cases. Brand new hats as well. Tons of great t-shirts. You get the item of your choosing from the shop if you win. And of course, you get the clout to brag to all your friends that you're this month's Quiller of the Month. And what's more valuable than that? So without further ado, I'm going to spin the wheel o' names, and the official Quiller of the Month for October 2023 is John Eddings. John Eddings. Congrats, John. Thank you so much for your continued support of the show. Thanks to each and every one of you who continue to donate your hard-earned cash to us each and every month so we can keep this show going and growing as best as we can. John, keep your eye out on your email, as well as we'll message you straight through Patreon to let you know how you can claim your winnings. John Eddings, the official October Quiller of the Month. Thanks again, everybody. Stephen, back to you.
Thank you, Jake, once again. And once again, we do all appreciate all that you do. And that wraps things up for episode 120, Quiller Nation. Yeah, it's hard to believe, isn't it? And that 6th anniversary is quickly coming upon us. So exciting to be a part of this Quiller Nation, and we're so grateful to have all of you as listeners. Thank you so much for joining us every fortnight. Until next time, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
Dragon Wagon.